Joining me today in the Capital TV show, Ambassador Chas Freeman. He is a former U.S. Ambassador to Saudi Arabia. Good afternoon, Your Excellency.
Good afternoon.
I want to start talking about the collaboration between Israel and UAE. The latest news said there is on the level of student exchange programs, Education Minister of Israel and UAE Ambassador to Israel, Mohammed Mahmoud Al-Khaja, agreed during a meeting discussing education initiatives between the two countries. What do you think about this cooperation?
Well, I think the cooperation is natural and a reflection of pragmatic approach to foreign policy by both. It is, however, under strain because of the Palestinian issue and Israel's continued oppression of the Palestinians. So there's a natural tension there, but it's apparent that Abu Dhabi has decided it wishes to pursue the agreements that it had with Israel, at least for now.
Do you think that the Abraham Accords are putting the region in a new era of peace?
I certainly wouldn't go that far. I think what they represented was the surfacing to the level of visibility of cooperation that was already occurring below the surface. So they don't represent a step toward peace because the countries involved were never at war. And they don't change the fundamental problems of the region, which are dealing with the rise of Iran and the Palestinian question.
The Washington Times stated Israeli forces and Palestinian militants issued competing declaration of victory after the horrific 11-day war that shook the Middle East through mid-May. But there are concerns among some in Washington that Iran gained the most from clash on the tactical and strategic level. Do you agree on this?
I think the major beneficiary of the crisis was, in fact, Hamas. And Hamas has a relationship of support with Iran. So yes, Iran demonstrated its relevance to the issues surrounding Israel.
Do you think that Biden have a plan for peace negotiation between Israel and Palestine?
I very much doubt it. The administration is trying to pivot toward Asia. This issue is not one that is popular in the United States at the moment. It's very divisive, and I don't think the administration does have a plan. And even if it did, it doesn't have any relationship at all with some of the key players. It does not have a relationship with Hamas. It does not have a relationship with Hezbollah. Does not have a relationship with Iran. And it has only a recently reestablished relationship with Mahmoud Abbas and the Palestinian Authority, which is very unpopular among Palestinians and doesn't have much legitimacy. And finally, it has a troubled relationship with the outgoing Netanyahu government. That is not an easy relationship. So Washington is largely sidelined.
Does it reflect on the war inside America? There is, as some analysts said, there is a war being waged on Jews, not only on the streets of Jerusalem or Tel Aviv, but also London, Paris, Berlin, Los Angeles, and New York. And they said the squad bears some responsibility for the attacks on American Jews. Can you elaborate more on the situation?
Well, I don't agree with that analysis. I think many people object to Israel's policies and behavior. And to the extent that Americans, whether they are Jews or other religions, automatically support Israel, they have to bear a measure of responsibility for what Israel does. And so it's natural that people object to them as well as to the Israeli policies they defend.
Mhm. On the other side, Politico is reporting that the Pentagon is monitoring two Iranian warships that might be headed to Venezuela. What do you think about the growing relationship between Iran and Venezuela, and how can the United States face this threat?
Well, I think this is a relationship between countries that the United States considers to be pariahs, outlaws, if you will. And there's not much we can do about it. We have a policy toward both that consists of essentially trying to promote regime change. It's not surprising that they have found each other and are cooperating.
Mm-hmm. There is some news about that USA bought some Iranian oil. Is it by coincidence or what's going on?
I don't know anything about that. There are, of course, talks going on in Vienna between the United States indirectly and Iran to restore the nuclear agreement that Mr. Trump abrogated and abandoned. And I don't know what the prospects of those talks are. But I have no knowledge of any oil sale.
Foreign Policy published an article saying Biden looks to the future in first defense budget, but Biden's planned cuts to current generation US jets and ships and his makeover of the nuclear arsenal are likely to meet criticism in Congress.
Well, in fact, they have. The Republicans are very critical of the Biden defense budget. So are liberal Democrats from a different vantage point. The Democrats ask why we're spending so much money on other people's fights and quarrels, and ask what our interest is in those. The Republicans want to plus up the defense budget, and that's been their position traditionally. So there's really no change. This is always controversial.
Mm-hmm. We're going to ask you about Lebanon. A report by the World Bank concludes that Lebanon's economic collapse could rank within the top 3 most severe crisis episodes globally since the mid-29th century. How USA can help Lebanon?
It's very difficult because of the Israel factor, the position of Hezbollah in Lebanese politics, Lebanon's relationship with Iran. All of these are problematic from the American point of view. On the other hand, Americans traditionally have had a very close relationship with Lebanon, in part because so many of us are able to trace our ancestry to Lebanon. So I think this is a dilemma with no easy answer.
Mm-hmm. Do you think that the aid for the Lebanese military can solve the problem? The American aid?
No, I don't think there are. I don't think there are military solutions to the Lebanese problem, which is part demographic, part the result of the constitution Lebanon inherited, confessional politics, the rivalry between Iran and Saudi Arabia, and of course, Israeli pressure on the southern border. So I don't think aid to the military is the answer.
The latest amnesty report on Yemen is important. It shows how the Houthi militia arbitrarily detains civilians, including journalists, subjects them to violence, torture, inhumane detention conditions, and psychological suffering. Militia of Houthis must be held accountable. Don't you see so?
I don't see very much to praise in any side's behavior in Yemen. But certainly the Houthis are guilty of multiple transgressions against human rights and have played a very tough and nasty game in their war against the ousted government and those like Saudi Arabia who are supporting it.
Mm-hmm. Do you think the negotiation in Vienna can include the war on terrorism that is led by Iran?
No, I don't think that issue can come usefully into that context. I think that is better dealt with and is being dealt with by direct dialogue between Riyadh and Tehran. Those are the two most concerned capitals. And we now know that thanks to intermediation by the government in Baghdad, they are talking to each other. That's good.
Mm-hmm. Brookings published a study talking about the peace process. They said it has stalled between the Zaidi Shia Houthi rebels and the Saudi-led coalition in Yemen. Saudi Arabia and the United Arab Emirates has entrenched their hold on strategic parts of the country. Riyadh and Abu Dhabi are unlikely to give up their gains without significant international pressure. What does it mean for?
My judgment is different. I think Saudi Arabia wants very much to extricate itself from Yemen, which has been a disaster for the kingdom. The United Arab Emirates is already, in most respects, withdrawn. And the problem is that the Houthis are determined to humiliate the kingdom rather than facilitate its withdrawal. Far from wanting to stay in Yemen, I think the Saudis now would prefer to be out of it, but are having a hard time getting out.
Mm-hmm. Ambassador Freeman, what do you know about the F-35 deal between US and United Arab Emirates? As we know that the UAE, they paid in cash. Do you think this deal will collapse somehow, or it will go in the right way?
Well, it's been under pressure from the start. First from the Israelis. Mr. Netanyahu apparently agreed to it, but then denied he had done so. His opposition in Israel has been trying to sabotage the deal in Congress. Most recently, there has been a China factor introduced with people who are anti-China objecting to the sale on the grounds that the Emirates has a close cooperative relationship with China as well as with the United States. Mm-hmm. I would just say that the world is more complicated now than it used to be. I don't know of any country, whether it's the Emirates or Saudi Arabia or Qatar in the Gulf or Oman, that doesn't have relationships with many great powers, not just the United States. They are all seeking relationships with China, with Russia, with India, and with different countries in Europe to counterbalance and reduce their reliance on the United States. So we face a new situation. We cannot be sure when we transfer arms that other great powers will not have a chance to examine them and learn from them.
As you were the interpreter for President Richard Nixon in his China visit 1972, what do you know about the future relationship between this administration and China? And there was a phone call a few days ago between the two presidents.
I think the relationship at the moment is largely frozen. And the reason for that has much to do with Mr. Biden's very slim majority in the House of Representatives and the 50-50 split in the Senate. In these circumstances, the easiest political course for him is to make common cause with the Republicans, who are very anti-China. And so we see Mr. Biden essentially locked into the policies that President Trump began. And there's really been very little change, slight change in tone, but no real change in substance to date. And I suspect that will continue for some time.
Do you think that the election 2022 will change the equation?
If the Democrats increase their majority in the House and break the logjam in the Senate, that will give President Biden more flexibility. But how he'll exercise it is hard to say. So far, as I say, he's been quite content to go with the American national consensus of hostility to China.
Thank you, Ambassador Charles Freeman, for your time. Thank you for being with us. Thank you so much.
My pleasure.